Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on methane. I'm Abba Sani. I'm serving as chair of the Climate Reality Project, Philadelphia and Southeastern Pennsylvania chapter. Our chapter has been very concerned about methane emissions, their impact, and how we can take action against them. Our methane campaign has been coming together from different angles. One is through the research and development of slides on methane that our chapter leader, Margarita Abe, has been spearheading. Tonight, she will talk about methane emissions and their impact. And the second, and maybe the third angle, is the work that our chapter is doing as an active member of two nationwide coalitions, which I'll talk a little bit more about during the second part of our presentation this evening. So I will share more on how you can advocate for stronger methane regulations in the federal EPA methane supplemental rule and the 2023 Farm Bill. The public comment period for both of those is still open. So we're honored to have leaders from our sister chapters here tonight who've been taking leading roles in the Regenerative Agriculture Campaign Coalition and the Solutions for Pollution Campaign Coalition. And we look forward to their participation in our Q&A discussion following our presentation. So before we get started, please note that this meeting is being recorded. We've reserved 1 hour for this meeting's presentation and Q&A discussion, and we'll adjourn at 8 o'clock. So during the presentation, please mute your microphone. We invite you to submit your questions in the chat. We'll be collating those for the Q&A session. And if you haven't done so already, please introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, city and state, in your Climate Reality chapter or organizational affiliation. All right, so let's get started. I will now turn it over to Margarita Abe, who serves on our chapter's leadership committee and leads our slide library group and our presentation boot camp program. So Margarita, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Okay, I hope everybody can see this. Maybe before we do our dive into methane emissions, I'm going to go back a little bit and just talk about emissions in general. Remember, there are many sources of greenhouse gas emissions. They include production of electricity, which is 25%, production of food accounts for 24%, heavy industry 21%, and transportation 14%. Notice that 3 of the 4 are related to the fossil fuel industry. Agriculture and food production has greenhouse gas emissions that are predominantly methane. These are produced by land animals raised for food, open burning of agricultural waste, and rice paddy cultivation. So let's look at the pie and how it's divided up. If you notice, the electricity production, buildings, transportation industry, these are all predominantly fossil fuel pollutants. And there are 2 pollutants left. Other is also fossil fuel pollutants, but these are actually due to the fossil fuel industry in its exploration and production of its material. And the other in green is food, agriculture, and land use. So my presentation is focusing on the gray and the green wedges. So looking at this in terms of greenhouse gases by major gas, of course, the predominant one is carbon dioxide from fossil fuels, land use, and chemicals. The methane and nitrous oxide are there also, and their part in the wedge is actually converged to the global warming equivalent of potential of carbon dioxide. So if we compare the greenhouse gas types, carbon dioxide is 420 parts per million. Methane, with 80 times the warming of carbon dioxide over 20 years, it is 1,900 parts per billion. So that would be 1.9 parts per million. Nitrous oxide is 300 times the warming of carbon dioxide over 100 years, and that is 330 parts per billion, or would be 0.3 parts per million. Action to reduce methane will also reduce nitrous oxide, which comes predominantly from agricultural and biological sources. This slide and the next 2 come from the EPA. This is for global atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide over time. The left-hand graph shows the last 800,000 years. The right-hand graph shows the last 70 years in parts per million. Here's methane, same time periods, parts per billion. And nitrous oxide, also same time period, parts per billion. So all three types increase at the same rate. This slide gives the same information, but over 250 years. Notice carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, very similar graphs on the bottom. But they also mirror the changes in global population, urban population, GDP, and energy use. And finally, also tropical forest loss, which is an excellent marker for environmental degradation. So then why are we talking about methane? Why does it matter? Well, in 20 years, methane produces more than 80 times the global warming of an equivalent amount of carbon dioxide. Because methane is short-lived and stays in the atmosphere for about 20 years, it's called the low-hanging fruit of climate remediation. Fixing methane emission problems gives us a short-term fix on these rising temperatures and buys us time to manage the long-term solution, which is dealing with rising carbon dioxide. So methane in the atmosphere, what goes with it? Well, initially in the first decade, methane traps infrared waves or heat waves in the atmosphere. Then the initial reaction of methane in the troposphere, which is the lower part of the atmosphere, is with hydroxyl ions. These ions are produced by nitric oxide, which is emitted by the fossil fuel industry. Methane's later reaction in the stratosphere is with ozone. By the end of the first decade, most of these began to react with ozone to produce carbon dioxide and water, and both of these contribute to global warming. So methane contributes to global warming both directly by trapping heat and indirectly through its products. As a side-related issue, nitrous oxide versus nitric oxide. Nitrous oxide comes directly from fossil fuel use and interacts with ozone to produce hydroxyl much more quickly than does nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide comes mostly from agriculture, food, wetlands, from biomass. It lasts in the atmosphere more than 100 years, and its sink, that is how it leaves, is by chemical interaction to nitric acid via ozone. So there's an extra step there. So nitrous oxide is not nearly as reactive as nitric oxide. Everybody remembers the COVID lockdown. Well, during that year, there was a large increase in methane in the atmosphere. In 2020, Siberia experienced an unprecedented heat wave with increased permafrost melting, and this increased its methane emissions. The decrease in fossil fuel use led to a decrease in fossil fuel emissions in 2020. And that had an interesting effect. Decreased fossil fuel use resulted in decreased hydroxyl ion in the atmosphere. Because of this, there was less conversion of methane into CO2 via reactions that include this hydroxyl ion. This reaction is very important because it normally removes more than 75% of the yearly input of methane from the atmosphere. So dealing with carbon dioxide without dealing with methane will lead to a disaster. What happened in 2020 exposed a complicated and crucial relationship among these greenhouse gases. So methane. 25% of global warming is due to it. Sources of methane include falling permafrost, landfill decay, and methane emitted by ruminants, as well as leaks from the fossil fuel industry. So notice that 3 of the 4 items are biologic in origin, and agriculture and the fossil fuel industry contribute equally to this problem. So we're going to look at the fossil fuel industry first. This graph shows you fossil fuel emissions due to its productions. The fossil fuel industry, both directly through its fuel production activities and indirectly through uses of its products, is responsible for most of the carbon dioxide emissions. However, the fossil fuel industry continues to emit methane as well. Fossil fuel industry sources of methane emissions are strongly related to equipment leakages and flaring. So let's look at these next. Now, this is a problem apart from the effects of using fossil fuels. This is the industry itself. Its production fields, both retired and current, produce large amounts of methane released from leaks, and the leakage is at least 60% higher than the industry estimates. Leakage occurs during production, transport, and local use. Emissions from some leaks are burned and flared, converting the gas to carbon dioxide. But other leaks, especially those from abandoned or retired fields, simply vent methane into the atmosphere. just like the leaks from infrastructure in our aging cities like Philadelphia. Now we can track those leaks, and these are 4 current methods. On the upper left, it's a piloted aircraft with a sensor. The upper right is a fixed continuous monitoring device, knows the solar cell powering it. Lower left, a drone-based sensor. Lower right is an image captured from a satellite. Now, these are all current methods that are in use. So where is the methane leaking from the infrastructure? Well, oil field leaks are really big. The Permian Basin is in western Texas, and this is the largest U.S. oil field. NASA estimates that by fixing Permian Basin leaks, we would decrease methane emissions by 55 tons an hour. Tracking these leaks in real time and fixing them is both possible and productive. Another source of leaks is fracking. Fracking releases very large amounts of methane. Finally, leaks from gas pipelines in residential areas release natural gas, which is mostly methane. What you're looking at is a small portion of the Permian Basin oil field. This is just a small track. Notice there are stacks in the background, and they're emitting what looks like blue gas. Well, this is one of them up close. This is a gas flare on top of a flare stack. It's burning methane. But you don't have to just have flares. This map of Philadelphia with Pennsylvania with all its yellow dots shows you oil and gas wells, both in active use and also abandoned, that are leaking methane and have gotten citations for it. And one ubiquitous part of modern life is the burning of natural gas for cooking and heating. Natural gas is almost entirely composed of methane. Its leaks contribute to global warming, but also pollute the air we breathe. Natural gas leaks due to aging infrastructure in cities is an ongoing problem. This leads to frequent catastrophic events. This fire in Brooklyn a couple years ago is one of them. The residential area, the leak was actually in one of the buildings. Philadelphia has leaks exactly like that. At least 30% of Philadelphia homes heat and cook with gas. There are leaks within dwellings, both when gas appliances are in use and even when they are not. An example of this occurred in early January. There was an explosion in Port Richmond that leveled several homes. That leak was found to be in the homes, not in the infrastructure, the pipes buried under the sidewalks. And you can actually smell that. You can walk around Philadelphia, South Philly, Bella Vista, Old City, and you can smell the methane leaks from the PGW infrastructure. So the EPA has a methane rule that's proposed. Its aim is to reduce the emissions by 87% below 2005 levels. How are they going to do this? They're going to encourage monitoring of all sites, include those abandoned sites, the sites that are no longer in use. They're going to encourage development of advanced and innovative systems of monitoring, including satellite use. Adopt a strict standard for emissions. Track super emitters and charge them. And finally, strengthen standards for flares, compressors, and pneumatic pumps. All the mechanical stuff that other rules were previously ignored, but are very important. So now let's move into the biological sources. These sources are mostly agriculture, food, and land use, but the land use includes deforestation. It also includes wetlands, land use that we really do not have human control over. So to understand the next slide after this, we need to first look at carbon. Carbon is an element with chemical number 6. This means it has 6 protons in its nucleus. Its nucleus also contains either 6, 7, or 8 neutrons. So carbon has 3 isotopes, 3 forms with different numbers of neutrons. This gives us carbon-12, carbon-13, or carbon-14. Methane can be formed from any of these 3 isotopes. Methane with carbon-13 is a bit heavier than methane with carbon-12. Methane sources emit a combination of carbon-12 methane and carbon-13 methane, and this is unique to the source. So fossil fuel source methane has a unique methane signature, ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13 in its methane, compared to that of microbial sources. Microbial sources are much lighter than fossil fuel sources and are mostly carbon-12. So by identifying the isotope percents in the methane, we can determine where the methane came from. Between 2000 and 2015, there was a very large increase in methane parts per billion in the atmosphere. So if you look at the slide on the right, you notice that slide on its y-axis has the amount of carbon-13 methane in percents. If you look at the yellow graph, the yellow is decreasing hydroxide, and the red on the bottom is the total. It's fossil fuel and microbial methane. But if you look what tracks with observation is just the increasing microbial. Increasing microbial decreases the amount of carbon-13 in the atmosphere because microbial source is lighter. So looking out the past 20 years, methane continues to go up. The blue lines are data plotted by the weeks, and the black lines are smoothed out yearly numbers. Look at the bottom and you see that the methane in the atmosphere is getting lighter. It's shifting more toward carbon-12. This means that the past 20 years have seen an increase in the biological sources of methane. Now, understand me, this does not get the fossil fuel industry off the hook. They're in trouble too. But this particular situation with microbial sources of methane is a significant problem because humans do not control where this is coming from. And the reason it does this is because some of these are natural and unleashed by rising temperatures. And we're going to look at some of them right now. This is a big one, thawing permafrost. Often considered a possible climate tipping point, thawing permafrost emissions are a steady process with an irreversible effect that have increased greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Permafrost underlies about a third of the boreal biome. Its thawing may unleash about 240 metric gigatons of CO2 and methane by 2100. This occurs two ways: anaerobic metabolism of thawed organic matter by microorganisms in the soil, and direct release of methane rising to the surface from underground reservoirs. And I'm going to show you a slide, which is actually a video, which is an example of this. Yamal Peninsula, Siberia, Russia, July 2016. A huge methane bubble. So permafrost in the Arctic. Well, the Arctic has warmed an average of 11 degrees Fahrenheit since 1985. Some permafrost in the Arctic is no longer freezing, even in winter. Emissions from the Arctic, primarily from thawing permafrost, are likely on a par with the annual emissions of Japan or Russia. Then there's landfill decay. Anaerobic decay of waste in landfill generates both methane and carbon dioxide. Together, these are between 90 and 98% of the gases produced. Municipal solid waste landfills are the third largest source of methane release in the United States. Initial decomposition in less than a year is aerobic, and this releases carbon dioxide, but afterwards subsequently becomes anaerobic, releasing methane. Finally, there's agriculture and greenhouse gas emissions. This is really what we have more immediate control over. Anaerobic agriculture, especially rice paddy cultivation, produces methane along with some nitrous oxide. Manure produces methane as well as nitrous oxide, as fertilizer does as well. Finally, there's livestock. They emit 5% of the carbon dioxide emissions, 44% of the methane, and 54% of the nitrous oxide. So looking at the methane emitted by livestock, more than 45% of agriculture and food production related methane emissions comes from them. And it's related to the animal's physiology, how they digest what they eat. Microbes in their stomach digest cellulose and other plant fibers, and that's how they end up emitting methane by belching, not farting. And this fact relates to how we think about dealing with this issue. Changing the animal's diet from grass-fed to feedlot decreases the amount of methane belched. However, if you think about this, change goes counter what we try to do when we move to regenerative agriculture, which is decrease feedlots. An additional source of methane production is the manure they excrete. This is a large enough amount for the EPA to give it a separate category on the next slide. If you look at this slide carefully, notice the enteric fermentation from livestock is almost as large as natural gas and petroleum methane. Landfills is almost as much as manure management and coal mining. But notice also, if you look at manure management, landfills, and enteric fermentation, that's a larger amount of methane released than coal mining and natural gas and production system, petroleum systems. And of course, if you call that slide I showed you, the world's population. One huge issue here is the world's population has quadrupled in the past century. This increases demands for energy and food to sustain the population. This slide compares resource requirements of animal versus plant-based food. So if you look at the bars, each bar is a double. It has a green section and a yellow section. The green section is actual land use. The lighter green is pasture, and the lower green, the darker green, is the cropland producing foodstuffs to feed the animals. The yellow bars are land use and agriculture production, both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions from both. So the two double bars on the far right are beef. The next two are sheep and goats, then dairy, poultry, fish, eggs, and pork. That pork gets you to the middle of the slide, of the graph. Anything below pork is almost insignificant in comparison in terms of the huge difference between animal and plant production. Here's another way of looking at the same data. Now we're looking at 100 grams of protein produced either by animal sources in the red box or plant sources in the green box. Notice tofu has a separate line, and then there's a comparison between cow's milk and soy milk on the bottom. Greenhouse gas emissions, these are all methane, but they're described in terms of the equivalent of carbon dioxide emissions. Notice what the difference is between animal-based and plant-based. Then look at the sulfur dioxide and potassium sulfate. This is due to fertilizer and due to manure runoff. And notice the difference again between animal and plant. And finally, the land use requirements of each of these. So in terms of land use, 12% of the land used for crops produces 85% by weight of our food. 37% of our land, which is used for farm animal grazing, only produces 12%. So it's really wasteful. There's a huge loss and opportunity here. The opportunity cost to current agricultural practices is a wasteful use of land. There's damage to oceans due to fertilizer runoff. And finally, pollution due to aquaculture. Farmed fish, it has adopted the same harmful land-based methods applied to the aquatic environments. And here are some photos to show what this looks like. Typical feedlot on land. Farm runoff for fertilizer and manure causing a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Fish farms, and below each cage is a thick sludge which produces methane. So agriculture in the world and the food system are the key to global climate change responses. A quote from the IPCC Special Report on Land of 2019. And the issues with agriculture. We need to expand food production worldwide over the next 3 decades to feed a growing global population. If we continue to promote animal protein as a source to global nutrition needs, we will escalate growing environmental degradation. And finally, we cannot deal effectively with global warming unless we decrease agriculture practices that produce methane. These are practices that are largely associated with use of animals for food. So current agriculture practices are not sustainable if you want to slow or stop global warming. Regenerative agriculture will help reverse ecological damage caused by industrial farming. But to feed a growing world population, we need to shift away from using animals for food and adopt a more plant-based diet worldwide. So the 2023-28 Farm Bill, this is an opportunity to alter U.S. agricultural practice, to support farming practices that improve soil via regenerative agriculture and reduce methane emissions along with this, to encourage ingestion of plant-based foods and decrease ingestion of animal products, to encourage reducing, recycling, and reusing of food waste. And this, of course, will also reduce methane emissions. So I will now end my part of the slideshow and turn it over to Abba.
Thank you, Margarita. That was a great presentation. So I will share my screen. And you all see the slide. Okay, great. All right, I'll be presenting an overview of how we're advocating for stronger methane regulations, and some of it overlaps with what Margarita has just shared. All right, we're taking action to support stronger methane regulations during the current rulemaking process for two federal bills Margarita mentioned, the EPA's methane rule and USDA's 2023 Farm Bill. So we're working in two nationwide coalitions to submit comments for these proposed rules. One is the Solutions for Pollution campaign is targeting about 20 policies. The EPA methane rule is one of those, and I'll share a little bit more about this coalition in the next slide. The Regenerative Agriculture Coalition is targeting the 2023 Farm Bill on two major fronts. One is to reduce methane emissions from agriculture and food systems, and the other is to incorporate regenerative agriculture practices in the 2023 Farm Bill. So this coalition has developed specific policy proposals for both methane regulations and regenerative agriculture practices. So I'll talk a little bit more about actions we've already taken for each of these federal bills and additional actions that you can take. So I'll start with a brief overview of the Solutions for Pollution campaign. All right, so last September 2022, our chapter officially joined the Climate Actions Campaign's Solution for Pollution campaign. So this is a coalition of environmental organizations, environmental justice groups, public health professionals, and others working together to protect our health and climate. The Climate Reality Project National is a coalition partner and an ally, and many other Climate Reality chapters, sister chapters, have also joined the coalition. So why has our chapter joined? This coalition's goal strongly aligns with our chapter's mission and vision. The coalition's goal is to reduce climate pollution and accelerate the transition to clean, renewable energy and a sustainable society in ways that support justice, jobs, improved health, and quality of life for all. We also want to add this campaign to the work that our Climate Reality sister chapters are doing as part of our Pennsylvania Chapters Coalition. Since the Susquehanna Valley chapter and Lehigh Valley chapters are also participating in the Solutions for Pollution campaign, and hopefully we'll be able to recruit other chapters to sign on as well. So this campaign is a multi-year campaign to demand that agencies across the federal government advance approximately 20 different protections that would first cut climate pollution in half by 2030, which is President Biden's promise and goal, advance vital public health and environmental justice goals, accelerate the transition to clean energy, and create new economic opportunity. So the coalition's position is that the Biden administration can carry out its responsibilities under our nation's bedrock environmental laws, such as the Clean Air Act, by enacting strong solutions for pollution that will both cut climate pollution and protect traditionally overburdened communities, our health and environment. So right now we're working on, as you can see the two check marks there, we're working on the oil and gas methane pollution standard, EPA's methane rule, and the soot air quality standards, which have just recently been published by the EPA. And as I mentioned before, the comment period for both of these rules is currently open. All right, so let me go to this slide. The federal methane rule, this is a very brief overview of the methane rule. The EPA's November 15th, 2021 proposal detailed new standards and emission guidelines under the Clean Air Act, Section 111, which would be included in the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 40 and Part 60 at the subparts indicated. The EPA proposed the first nationwide emissions guidelines for greenhouse gases in the form of methane limitations for the crude oil and natural gas source category, including the production, processing, transmission, and storage segments. The November 2021 proposal was intended to mitigate climate destabilizing pollution and protect human health by reducing greenhouse gas and volatile organic compounds emissions from the O&G industry, specifically the crude oil and natural gas source category. So the EPA reviewed about 470,000 public comments and then published the methane supplemental rule. So in summary, the purpose of the supplemental rulemaking is to strengthen, update, and expand the standards in the 2021 proposal. The EPA is proposing 4 major things. First is standards for certain sources that were not addressed in the November 2021 proposal, revising the proposed requirements for fugitive emissions monitoring and repair, and establishing a super emitter response program. 2, revisions that strengthen standards for sources of leaks, provide greater flexibility to use innovative advanced detection methods by providing additional options for the use of advanced monitoring, that some of those that Margarita mentioned, and modify and refine certain elements of the proposed standards in response to concerns and information submitted by the public. And 4th, they're proposing details of the timelines and other implementation requirements that apply to states to limit methane pollution from existing designated facilities in the source category under the Clean Air Act. So just wanted to briefly go through EPA's terminology and definitions pertaining to the industry that this methane rule applies to. So the EPA characterizes the oil and gas industry operations as being generally composed of 4 segments: extraction and production of crude oil and natural gas processing, transmission and storage, and distribution. And the EPA defines crude oil and natural gas source category to mean 1, crude oil production, which includes the well and extends to the point of custody transfer to the crude oil transmission pipeline or any other forms of transportation. And 2, natural gas production, processing, transmission, and storage, which include the well and extend to, but do not include the local distribution company custody transfer station, commonly referred to as the city gate. All right, so what have we done so far? Our chapter's actions have included presenting verbal testimony during the EPA's 3-day public hearing on January 10th through 12th. You'll find links to that testimony on our chapter's website. We've also collated a whole host of references to help you draft your comments. I've indicated the our chapters folder. There's a link for that on the slide. And we've also collated EPA's methane rule publications. You'll find many of those on their website. I've listed 4 of these here that are helpful, that I found very helpful, including the 3rd bullet here, changes since the November 2021 proposal and key areas where the EPA is seeking comment. So for this supplemental rule, they're accepting comments on the entire rule, but there are certain provisions where they're specifically asking for additional comment. And then the final bullet there is how to comment. And if you have any questions about that, you can just always reach out to us and we'll help you out. So how can you take action? There are 3 things that you can do. The first is to join our Solution for Pollution campaign, and I've included the link there to our sign-up form. There's still time to submit your comments to the EPA. The deadline for those is next week, February 13th. You can submit your comments anonymously if your identity or contact information is not provided in the body of your comment. And then finally, we have posted an online petition letter, which you can personalize and send to the EPA if you don't have time to submit your comments. All right, so the other rule that I mentioned briefly is the soot pollution. This was recently published. And the deadline to submit your comments is March 28th. The public hearing is coming up. And if you want to take action today, you can sign our online petition. That's our unique link to that petition. And so we're trying to gauge how many members and community members can sign our petition. And I've included some resources and references here to help with the soot pollution. And if anyone is working on those or is interested, let us know. We're just getting started with reviewing the materials for those. All right, so again, we're inviting you to join our chapter Solution for Pollution campaign and work with our sister chapters and allied organizations in this nationwide coalition. And we're looking forward to seeing you on our sign-up sheet. And there's a lot to do, and we'd welcome your help to engage with this coalition, our members and communities. And on that note, you can sign up for our regenerative agriculture campaign and work with our sister chapters on this coalition. I've included the link here. Richard Cole, who is on the call here tonight, has been taking the lead to represent our chapter in the RA coalition, which our sister chapters in Chicago and Colorado are leading. And we're honored to have Don Biselli here tonight from the Chicago chapter, and we look forward to his participation in our Q&A discussion as well. All right, so what is the Farm Bill? Just very briefly, I've shown this slide before, Richard has also shown this slide. The Farm Bill covers many different areas of legislation that governs much of the U.S. food and agriculture system, including policies on nutrition, crop insurance, conservation, rural investment, land access, and more. These policies impact farmer livelihoods, the environment, and national food security and access, as Margarita had mentioned. So while the Farm Bill is renewed every 5 to 7 years, the current 2023 Farm Bill may not be voted on until 2024 or even 2025. So the next slide here, Margarita has presented the same graph. There are just some key issues that I wanted to highlight again, that agriculture and food systems are the largest contributor to methane emissions, representing about 37% in the US and projected to increase. So if we continue on this trend, the current greenhouse gas emissions in food systems would prevent the achievement of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and threaten to overshoot that target, even if fossil fuel emissions were immediately halted. So the food and agriculture methane emissions currently exceed those of the oil and gas industry. That's why it's important that we're working on this in addition to working on emission limitations from the fossil fuel industry, as Margarita had mentioned. Okay, so why add regenerative agriculture to the Farm Bill? Margarita has talked more about that. And the top reasons here, simply to implement climate smart crop policies to mitigate climate change and meet the UN emissions reductions goals, stop industrial farming practices that are degrading our topsoil and polluting our rivers, lakes, and oceans, help farmers and ranchers reduce input costs and increase profits, increase crop yields in extreme weather conditions, increase nutrient values in our food supply, and finally, greatly reduce carbon emissions by sequestering more carbon in our soil than we release into the atmosphere. Okay, so what have we done so far? And this coalition has done quite a lot, and I give the credit to the Chicago chapters and the Colorado chapters that have taken the lead on this. So far, we have submitted a letter to the U.S. Congress on methane policy in the 2023 Farm Bill. I've included the link to that petition here. So the methane reductions or the methane regulations that we're supporting in this in this policy recommendation are included in these 3 bullets. Briefly, supporting and bringing to scale feed additives and other means to reduce enteric and manure emissions from beef and dairy operations. Supporting healthy plant-rich diets through the SNAP and other nutrition programs, and reducing food waste. So the coalition has also researched and drafted a document called the Agriculture Policy Changes for a Sustainable Future. This document is, I've provided the link here, is a remarkable document. As I've mentioned this quite a few times before, it's been really well researched, and I would highly recommend that you all take a look at it, read through it. The 3rd bullet here is that we've submitted a letter to Climate Reality Project, our Climate Reality Project founder, Mr. Al Gore, to support and initiate a Climate Reality Project national campaign this spring that advocates for climate smart renewable energy practices in the 2023 Farm Bill, to show how regenerative agriculture can help mitigate the harmful effects of climate change while providing many positive benefits to farmers, ranchers, and others. So we're asking him to champion our policy recommendations that the Regenerative Agriculture Coalition has put forth. And we're waiting to hear back, anxiously waiting to hear back on that. All right, so how can you take action with this coalition and for the 2023 Farm Bill? First, again, join our Regenerative Agriculture Coalition. I guarantee you'll enjoy this. We have a ton of information, a ton of resources to get you started. The second is you can start sending letters to your federal legislators. We have sample letters in the coalition's Google Drive. We've mentioned that before. The other way is you can take action using the Climate Action Now app, which is a fabulous tool. You can search Farm Bill and the current actions that are posted will come up. And third, of course, you can start exploring the many different resources. These are a few other organizations that have collated and are presenting a lot of information. If you look at the Soil Food Web, that's a really great resource for students, and it goes through some case studies on new approaches to incorporating regenerative agriculture. And the Kiss the Ground, there's a film that you can watch as well that has a lot of information on regenerative agricultural soil health and an overview of the Farm Bill. All right, so I have one more slide here. This is an announcement. The Climate Reality Project is opening up their Power Up training. This is a special training. It's not the traditional Climate Reality Leadership Core training that we're used to. This will focus on the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, touches upon many areas, including amending the methane provisions in Clean Air Act, which I actually look forward to learning more about. The online training is starting April 6th. There'll be an on-demand content will be available during that time period. And the training includes 2 required broadcast sessions, which are on April 11th and 13th. So as I said, the registration is open. I provided the link there, and you're welcome to sign up for that. So that is my last slide, and we'll open the floor up for discussion, for Q&As. For the Q&A session, and I'll stop sharing my screen. So Julia has been keeping track of the chat. Haven't seen any questions come in, or if there is,
we had one question.
Okay.
For those who have who aren't following along in the chat. So Bill Cousins was asking Margarita about how the earlier slides was talking about how the industry often underestimates the amount of methane emissions, And so then with the pie chart, was that the, the underestimated amounts or the, the actual amounts? So, so Margarita says that's based on the current data measuring methane emissions in the atmosphere that was done by the EPA. So that was a good question and good answer there. And so now we're opening it up to any other questions that people have. Feel free to, speak up, raise your hand, or if you want to just type it in the chat, that's fine too. I thought it was excellent presentations there. Yes, Richard.
So a lot of the methane, trying to reduce that is through, the mechanisms of the fossil fuel industry, with the methane rule that's being revisited and is still, I think, for a couple days anyway, up for public comment. And then there's also the Farm Bill, which addresses the methane and ways to cut down in the agriculture sector. But the thing too, I think that's important here is that stopping or reducing emissions, whether it's CO2 or methane, is not enough. And this has been acknowledged by the IPCC loudly, that it's not enough to just stop emissions, but it is necessary to draw them down. And that's not just for CO2, but it's also for methane. There's a lot more methods for CO2 drawdown than there are at this point anyway for methane. Some of those, like for instance, there's something called ocean iron fertilization. It's controversial, but it's a natural process. It's just speeded up. But there's other methods that are being developed or researched at this point for removing methane, because that has to happen.
I see, Bill, you have your hand up.
Yeah, my question, I guess it's for you, Abba, although Richard or Marguerite could comment as well. I've seen emails saying that we ought to offer comments on the methane rule, and that the comments are, or the emails I've read are saying it's not strong enough. And I'm curious if we're offering, and maybe I haven't dug into either Climate Reality's recommendations for comments, or there are other organizations like Clean Air Council that's also suggesting that we make comments. I haven't dug into those, but are there specific areas where the rules, the methane rule that EPA is promulgating, needs to be strengthened?
So as I mentioned, there are specific areas that the EPA is requesting additional comments on. And there's a document that the link to that document, I posted in my slide. So what I did is I looked through that document before I put my comments together, and I commented on the provisions for the timeline for the states for their the timeline that's required for them to put together their plan and all of that. So that's one area. I've seen people submit comments on the flaring, and there's other details about the sources. So, for example, let me see if I can find that quickly.
One thing that my comments focused on is they talk about having third-party monitoring of methane, but that third party has to go through like a certification process and everything. But it really didn't go into any detail about how just like an average citizen who maybe lives near a fossil fuel plant, how they can be involved with that process, if they could request a third party to come in and monitor a specific power plant because, they have suspicion that, that it's leaking methane. So that was my comment, was that there needs to be more, more information on how just the average regular public can become involved.
And there was some other technical requirements. Well, one source that was specifically mentioned, that was not specifically mentioned in the prior November 2021, was the dry seal centrifugal compressors. So they're presenting provisions on that in this new supplemental rule, and requesting comments on that as well.
I know an issue with the Pennsylvania rules around methane leakage. They excluded certain categories. I think low volume producers were excluded. And I'm wondering, in the federal rules, is it comprehensive? Does it include all levels of wells and amount of production, or does it also exclude certain types of facilities? Did you, Julia or Abba,
My
did you notice?
understanding, my understanding is that they did expand the wells that are covered from the original proposed methane rules, so that it encompasses more of the smaller wells. Now, I don't know if that takes care of all of the wells or not, but I do know that it at the very least it was expanded from the initial proposed rules.
Okay, that's helpful.
We've also published some tables, and if you go to the actual federal register, they've published some of the tables that kind of summarize the different sources and requirements for each. So I see Don has, or was there anything else, Bill?
No, those were, I may have others, but that's all I can think of right now. Thank you.
All right, Don?
Yeah, I really want to compliment both of you for an excellent presentation. There was an awful lot of data and information in these slides. I'm just sorry that more chapter members within CRP wasn't able to attend. Since this is recording, I would suggest that you stick this up on the Nature-Based Solutions website, post it, if you're going to make the link available so others can see what you obviously researched very well. I have a couple comments and a couple questions. One comment is, I hope you had the opportunity to view it was the Our Climate Moment Climate Action Now Action Party for Tales of Two Gases, methane and hydrogen. Did any of you see that?
No.
I missed it initially a couple weeks ago, but it's a recording, it's available, and I watched it, and it is one of the more informative sessions I have seen since I began my journey on regenerative agriculture. I really encourage you to listen to the first half. It's a professor at Cornell, probably a friend of Marianne Cassie, who hosted the event. But he will explain so much of how harmful methane is, even to the point where using natural gas as a bridge, it's not a very good idea, and probably pollutes our environment more than burning coal. I had no idea. And then the second presenter talks a little bit about policies and hydrogen, and those efforts are also going to be detrimental to our environment. Even I had hopes for green hydrogen, but now I'm not so hopeful. But anyways, I really recommend those. Those are available to watch. I did have a couple questions on for Margarita. Maybe I guess I need to review the information. I understand the isotopes and carbon kind of well, since I've been at this for 2 years now. But I didn't get a lot of information on how to reduce methane from the agricultural side. There's a lot of controversy, as you well know, CAFOs producing methane, but we put too much blame on cows. And if you watch that presentation, A Tale of Two Gases, you'll see the real blame belongs on fracking. The fracking gases are what's actually increasing. So maybe that data, which is proven now, and you'll see that in that presentation I mentioned, they have the data to back that up. So I don't blame the cows. I never did. I blame CAFOs. I blame manure pits, and they need to be moved out, grazed animals, and let nature do its job, and use composting. And that's all available through the Soil Food Web case studies. And so that's basically all I have to say. I hope we can get more people see what you two have done on these two issues. And thank you for the compliments on regenerative agriculture. We are trying very hard to get the to do a national campaign, if not spring, then this year. I don't know if they're going to vote on the bill this year or not. Hopefully they will. But we need something, especially since there's going to be a march in Washington, March 6th and 7th. We're going to be a little conspicuous if we're not involved somehow with the activities that are going on promoting regenerative agriculture. So thank you. I really enjoyed this. I just wish more people could have seen it tonight.
Hey, Don?
Don, just real quick, Don, can you send the link to that recording of the Tale of
Oh,
Two Gases?
sure.
Send it to
Yes.
Ava so
It was-
that in the follow-up email, she can include that.
Okay, no problem.
If you have it
Okay,
handy, you can
Richard.
put it in the chat. Only if you have it handy.
Well, I have to grab it. My PC doesn't have enough power, so I'll send it to
Okay,
you.
then later. Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Yes, thank
Richard,
you.
did you have something?
It was actually the same question.
Oh, okay, great. Great.
Well, it's circulating now within our chapter leaders in Chicago because it's got so many good points. I'm on 2 other committees. One is electrifying buses, and there was some hope for hydrogen for large trucks, et cetera. And also on a suburban action plan for communities and using methane. Well, natural gas apparently is not we need to phase out quicker than I had expected.
Thank you,
I had
Don.
a question for Margarita. So I have heard that if you feed cows a certain type of seaweed, that reduces the amount of methane that they produce. How viable a solution is that? I mean, I know it's not going to solve everything, but is it at least, will it at least help?
I have read something about that. I think that actually makes a huge decrease in the amount that they belch. The issue might be, though, is they have to decide long term if it's a viable solution for the feeding. Because one of the reasons we feed cattle is to get large animals to give us a lot of animal protein. And they aren't really sure if doctoring the diet has a long-term effect on that part of why we have feedlots to begin with. And of course, the other issue is if you're going to be tampering with their diet, then you're really committing yourself to large feedlots. If they go out and they graze, grass-fed cattle emit more methane than feedlot cattle, even without doctoring the diets. Because the feedlot cattle are often fed other things besides grass.
Yeah, too many carbohydrates.
Yeah, you got it.
I have a question. This is
Sure.
Vicky.
Okay.
I'll
One
put
more.
my video on so you can see who's talking. Oh, can't see me anyway because of the lights. I'm Vicky Smedley, and I'm from Jersey Shore, and I'm sitting in the place of Sandy Field tonight. I am a part of the Climate Reality Susquehanna Valley. However, for the last 21 months, I have done absolutely nothing because I am involved in a very nasty divorce, and when it's over, I hope to get back to being an activist again. But right now, I can't commit to things. However, I have what might be a very small scale question, but listening to Margarita's presentation about the animal production, I'm hardly a CAFO, but I have 12 chickens who I use only for eggs. I don't eat the chickens, but I use the eggs and I clean out their pen at least once a week, their quarters, which have been, they deposit all of their excesses there into pine chips. And I got this bright idea to start taking it out as I'm doing it and put it into big buckets with lids and composting them. Do you see any kind of a problem with the methane that those chickens are producing? Because even when they're out of their pen, they're free range during the day. They get penned up at night because of wild critters. But should I be picking up the poop in the yard that they're leaving all over my yard? I pick up my dog's poop for other reasons, but I'm just wondering how much you think that might, having 12 chickens might be a methane producer.
Chickens do not really produce much methane. They're not ruminants. The big
Right,
ruminants
but-
are beef,
I
goats.
saw that went all the way down from the beef to through the pork and all of that.
Yeah,
But then it said chickens was one, or poultry, and then it said at the very bottom, eggs.
right. But if you remember looking at the graphs, the amount that they produce is very small. The big issue for methane producers are ruminants.
Okay.
Ruminants are cattle, sheep, goats. Of course, there are a lot of wild ruminants, moose are ruminants also. But we don't feed them. I mean, they're wild animals, but chickens both grows for meat and all for their meat and also for eggs, and also even pork and fish are very, very tiny producers of methane.
Well, I did have some sheep too, but they're in my freezer now. And they produced an awful lot.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about picking up the manure, that might be useful for another reason besides just methane, because you compost it and that improves your soil.
Well, my question is, should I be putting that kind of compost? Should I be composting it to put on my gardens?
Okay, that's a good question. I don't know enough about composting. Do you feel able to answer the question? Probably it's okay. I think when you compost, I think the people who do that, the composting takes a bit of time before
Mhm.
they can actually before they actually use it on the soil where they're going to grow vegetables to eat. I don't know how long it takes to get rid of the bacteria in the manure before you can safely put it on the stuff that you're going to grow the stuff.
Yeah, I don't think the bacteria is a problem. I was just wondering about the methane. I've composted for years, but I never thought about the fact that compost piles are probably producing methane too. It's a very small question and a very big problem. I realize that. I just thought maybe somebody would have some ideas about it.
We might have some composting experts in our chapter and among our allies, actually. This is something that people have talked about before. Not specifically about chickens though, but we can maybe tap into our expertise.
I was going to offer Vicky a comment, and that's that the chicken poop that's falling when they're out doing their free range thing, it's falling in the yard, and
Right.
presumably it's fertilizing the grass or whatever you have growing there. So I would just let it rest, let it go into the soil and fertilize your grass.
Well,
Would be
that's what
my
I've been
thought.
doing. That's what I've been doing. Yeah, it does fertilize the grass, that's for sure. And when she can get to it, it's treats for my puppy.
Ooh.
Yeah, really.
Right,
I have a question back on the regenerative agriculture for Don or whoever.
Okay, sure.
Does the current,
I'm sorry, Bill. I just wanted to point out that we're a little over 8 o'clock. If people have to go, please feel welcome to leave the room, the Zoom room here. And we look forward to catching up with you after the meeting, and we'll send you the links and slides, links to the recording and to the slides.
this
you
is
have
just
to-
a quick question.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sure. I'm happy to stay.
Does the current Farm Bill have any regenerative agricultural provisions in it? Because I think one of Abba's slides said add regenerative agriculture to the Farm Bill. Is there anything in there now, or is it a heavy lift to get even anything in there?
It's going to be very difficult. They do not use or want to see any climate-oriented language in the bill. They will accept climate smart now because USDA is pushing it. Yes, there are practices in there under the conservative titles and subsidy titles dealing with cover crops, They're going to see more insurance and subsidies for farmers to do that. But the two big things, even though there won't be a lot of major changes because no farmer and no politician, especially Republicans, want any changes to the safety nets that they currently have. There's not a lot of extra money. But the big thing that our organization is pushing are things that the EWG, the Environmental Working Group, I think, organization mentioned. Whatever policy changes we recommend or that should be added to the Farm Bill need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or sequester more carbon. You don't have to spend any more money, just don't give them money to continue the current industrial practices. And yeah, there will be some changes, and some changes are already in the Farm Bill, and but we need to expand that greatly.
Yeah, my thought
I'd
was
like
just
to-
because of our Republican majority in the House, getting anything in there that smacks of climate, addressing climate is going to be tough.
It's difficult, yes, but there
I-
will
I'd
be
like to
some advantage.
I'd like to follow up that question with, is there anything in the current version of the Farm Bill that would penalize somebody for using regenerative agriculture methods?
Unfortunately, yes, because some of the insurance subsidies and incentives don't apply to people who are already practicing regenerative agriculture. For example, carbon markets, carbon pricing. So that needs to be sorted out. So if they've already been doing it for 10 years and making money, they don't get rewarded by the government. On the other hand, they're making money, they don't need the subsidies and insurance because they're surviving better.
Right.
It's a paradox, I know.
Yeah.
Any other last questions?
Thank you all.
Perfect.
This has been very informative. I
Well,
appreciate
thank
it.
you. Thank you, Bill.
Hey, we meet every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks during the month as well. So join us in some of our coalition meetings. And we post them on Reality Hub. You can check that out too.
Great.
Great. Thank
Okay,
you.
okay, we'll wrap it up then. Thank
you.
you so much, everyone. It's been a wonderful evening. Thank you for your contributions to our excellent discussion. And thank you, Margarita, for sharing your slides, for developing those. As I said, we'll follow up by sending everyone the links to the recording and to the slides. So thank you. Have a great evening, everyone. And we look forward to continuing this discussion
Yes.
after
Great.
meeting.
Thank you, Alba.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you all.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Night.